Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Nikki Ryberg. I'm a career and life coach for women. I help them focus on balance. I am based in the Oregon, Wisconsin area, which is how I found this amazing local resource who's joining us today, Kelly Petrie. I actually stumbled across her when I first moved here, probably about 4 years ago, and I've actually utilized her for some mindfulness training myself, a couple of private sessions. I am not a patient person. So when I am trying to help coach my clients through the job search process, when they tell me things like, it's really hard, I don't like waiting, what should I do? I can recommend meditation. I can recommend like experts to go talk to, but when their eyes glaze over, I'm like, I get it. It's not an easy subject to just be like, oh, I'm going to go do this, especially when like your mortgage is on the line and life is hard. So I just want to take a moment to welcome Kelly and have her share a little bit of her story with us and how one can become like a proclaimed expert, because I can attest from meeting with her, I felt calmer for weeks, just I think from being around her, not to mention the stuff she taught me. So thanks for joining us today, Kelly.
Thanks so much for having me, Nikki. This is really a delight to be here and to be invited to talk about this topic. So a little bit about myself. I have been what I call a contemplative educator in the community for over a decade, probably going more on 12 or 13 years now. And I used to do it mainly through relationships with other types of organizations. But now I have my own space, and that space is called the Maitri Center for Mindful Living. And I've been employed here as a business for about 4 years now. And one thing to mention, the word, a lot of people wonder about the word Maitri. It's
Yeah.
Maitri. And it is a word that is translated to mean loving kindness or compassion or friendliness. And I think that this is going to be really essential when we talk about how the job search can create a lot of anxiety and impatience and so forth, is how do we apply that into our lives. So it's really an essential piece of mindfulness. And so there's so many things that I do here. I'm in my space right now. And so it's a wide range. I work with all ages, very young children, elderly people, everyone in between, lots of different life circumstances, different abilities, classes, private sessions, as you mentioned. And really what I'm hoping to offer people are different tools for navigating the ups and downs of life in whatever way that might look, and to support one's well-being as best as we can, with maybe some tools that haven't really been tried before or fully understood. So that's what I want to kind of talk about today, is how is this different than something else that you might be doing to work with stress and the anxiety of looking for a job. So one of the common questions that I get is what brought me to do this work myself. And I think that's really important.
Mhm.
This work really kind of came about because I needed it for myself personally. I was a very anxious person. I still am to a certain degree, but very anxious, experiencing a lot of panic attacks and so forth, and really not finding something that was helping to relieve what I was experiencing in a sustainable way. And so I stumbled upon meditation and mindfulness practices, and then subsequently decided to embark on a master's program that really addresses this and incorporates it into one's profession. So that's how I got started. And I can tell you that for me, I actually was feeling much better myself when I was meditating and practicing mindfulness, but I wasn't really sure that it was actually noticeable to other people. Like it felt soothing to me, but I still was experiencing anxiety, right? So it's like, well, do I still come off as this anxious person? And I, at one point, had a friend tell me when I was describing a particular circumstance to them that I would normally be freaking out about, that they really just were like, I am just so shocked that you are calm as you're describing this story. And that was really the first time that I realized that this isn't just an inner feeling that I'm feeling, but people are also noticing a difference. And so maybe just energetically, I'm moving through the world with a little bit more ease. And so naturally, I wanted to share this with others because if it can help me, it can help others. And that's what I really just want to be of service to other people. So
I love that. I love that. And that's why we're here today. I know for myself personally, my goal in 24 is to get to more of Kelly's yoga sessions where she incorporates yoga with the mindfulness training, because I know it's been huge for me. But I also know that because I'm such an impatient person, when my clients look at me and they're like rolling their eyes or thinking, yeah, okay, whatever, Nikki. I feel like it's one thing to talk about meditating or mindfulness, but when folks are like really in it, I want to relate when they're in it to this practice. So, for instance, a lot of my clients, one of the first things we have to kind of handle is how the heck do they stay patient during the job search process, especially when it gets hard? And, I can coach them on proactive steps they can take, networking, all of those things. But the mental piece in that patience process, there's science tells me there's a link between meditation and that. And what can folks do, Kelly? Because it's super hard.
it is super hard. And as I was sharing to you before we started recording, I've had sort of a doozy of a morning where my own patience was being tested. And it was really an on the spot practice for me. So I kind of want to approach this from a couple of different angles because, everybody's going to kind of enter into this in a different way. We all have a different constitution and our makeup, our personalities, and so forth. And so we might have different entry points in how we can practice this. So first of all, I just want to mention that the word patience itself is one of what we call the attitudinal qualities of mindfulness. There's 7 different attitudinal qualities, actually probably more than that, but 7 different ones that a really well-known meditation teacher by the name of John Kabat-Zinn talks about. And so patience is really a key piece to mindfulness. Now, does that mean that when you're being impatient, you're being unmindful? Well, not necessarily. What I was thinking about as I was experiencing my own impatience today was that it's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable feeling to be on that kind of like the edge of your seat, just waiting for something to happen. And so it's more than just a mental, dialogue that we're having. It is an embodied experience as well. And so to really notice that how we actually physically feel impatience, I think is a really crucial piece. And that gets us a little bit more in touch with the discomfort of feeling impatient. And then what mindfulness offers us is how to be comfortable with discomfort. And that's the trick, right? Is can I still be feeling impatient? Can I have this discomfort in my body that I'm not trying to resist or disconnect from, but can I actually rest in that discomfort? And if we notice that we are uncomfortable or we're not feeling relaxed or whatever it is, and we can be okay with it, then we're not really, we don't really become that impatience. It sort of has then this opportunity to sort of dissolve or to become a little bit more spacious, feel a little bit more easeful in our experience. So
I like that. So to the person, I get this a lot. People will reach out to me. They think about using me. Maybe they sit in on a few things. And then I don't hear from them again for about 3 months. And then when I hear from them, the sky is falling. They can't stand their job, or they were ultimately laid off due to budget cuts that they were maybe anticipating. And they're in it and they know they feel uncomfortable. And they also know it I warn them, it could be 3 to 4 months before you find something. What tips would you have for folks like that that are in that feeling that uncomfortable space that frankly are going to have to come to terms with it because it is kind of is what it is. What are some techniques or tools they could fall back on to get better at practicing being in that uncomfortableness? Because I can see some of a lot of my clients are like me, high strung type A. They're just like, yeah, right, Nikki. Okay. Yeah, I'm well aware of that. And I'm like, well, seriously, this stuff works. Just try it. And I'm hoping we can sell them on trying it because I feel like a big part of it is just being willing to try it. 80% of the people I feel like give up before they ever try it. And if you actually try it, like this stuff works. So what are some tips you have for someone that maybe like they know nothing about this? How would they start to use some of these techniques to kind of feel okay in that uncomfortableness as they're checking refresh on their phone and their email every 2 seconds waiting for an interview?
Yeah, what a great question. One of the things that I always suggest anytime I introduce a practice that is really meant to address, some sort of turmoil in one's life, sometimes it's best to practice it with the thing that we're not hoping to fix, right? So if I were to say, okay, every time you notice impatience when it's related to your job, that's probably a little too intense. It's probably a little bit too big to work with in the moment. So just as, if you were to go to a gym and want to start lifting weights, you're not going to do it with the heaviest weight, right? You're going to start small. You're going to start with something that is really accessible and not so charged. So I would suggest that people start this by noticing those moments of impatience when they're, say, standing in line at the grocery store waiting to check out, right? So to really start to bring that aware mind to recognizing when impatience is present, okay? So it's one thing to know it and to recognize it, but then this is where you're saying, well, what do I do with that now? What do I do? And here's where we bring an investigative mind to this. So it's important to understand that we can have this feeling sense of impatience, and then we have this whole thing that's going on in our brains about the narrative around it, right? Very heady, very conceptual. And so it's not to say that the thinking mind is a bad thing. We need the thinking mind, but we also want to not get so entangled in the thought and really start to become curious about our sensorial experience, meaning our sensory experience, our emotional experience, the energetic experience. And so we can say, okay, yes, here's impatience happening right now. And you can maybe notice the story, like, I don't have time to wait in line. I need to get on to the next thing. I need to get home and cook dinner, whatever it is. Notice that, but rather than getting reeled in to that whole story, then drop into the body. And maybe it just starts with feeling your 2 feet on the ground. Like just right now, like whoever's watching this, you, me, like, can you actually feel your 2 feet on the ground? It's like a little pause. And when you have to reorient your attention to some sensory experience, like feeling your 2 feet on the ground, it takes you out of your head. It takes you out of that narrative that might be spinning within the mind. And there's something about the ground itself. It's very stable, right? It's solid. It supports us. It nourishes us. And so we make that connection to the earth, the ground. And then from there, we can then become curious because now we're in our body. You can become curious. Okay, I'm feeling impatient right now. Where does impatience live in my body? It's a real open-ended question. And there certainly is no right or wrong answer to what someone's experience is that, but you're just simply questioning it and looking. And for some people, you might find it. You might find that it feels like speediness in my body, like, heat rising or a tightening or a clenching in my body. And for some folks, you might look and be like, well, I can't even find it. So that gives us some information in terms of it being either unfindable, that it's not really so solid, or that if we are experiencing some body response to impatience, that if we stay with it and look at it, that we might also discover that it changes, that maybe it doesn't feel so solid, that it sort of has a softness to it or a little bit more space to it. So that's one technique that I think is very simple to do. However, it can also, it might last for a split second that you bring this investigative mind to the experience, and the mind then starts still continuing to spin stories. And so there, what might be really helpful is to relate to the breath, to take a breath in and to release a breath out. And just one cycle of breath, can you just kind of take in this sip of space and then exhale fully to release it, and just to be present with what's happening.
Oh, I love that. It's taking me back to our session. I know I have certain parts in my body where I feel like certain things, and it taught me to hone in on that. And I want to remind all of our listeners to also use some of this for when you're interviewing the employer. When I look back over my past career, I usually had like certain physical reactions to certain things during the interview process for employers that were ultimately not a good fit for me. And I like didn't trust my gut. It didn't always show up in my gut. Sometimes it showed up in other ways. But I think even if you're still not buying into this practice yet, try to give it a chance also from that perspective. Because if you start to really get in tune with your breath and how your body's feeling, that is the best thing you can do for making like the decision of, is this a good employer or a good boss for me? Or should I leave this toxic environment? Like, will the grass be greener? I'm too scared to make a change. Some of this touches on some of that. So I think the more work you do with mindfulness and starting to kind of, get into your intuition, the better. So Kelly, if folks are in it, like they're in the job interview or they're in a critical networking meeting, or they know that this person has some impact, some, power at the company for decision making, and all of a sudden you like freeze, like you panic, like I feel like I've always like speak pretty well on my feet, but I've noticed with like one of my kids does it better than the other. And in certain situations, my husband's awesome at it. And at other times, I'm like, why didn't you say something? And he's like, I don't know. It didn't. We all have those. We all have those different moments where we're like, we just like, we get stuck or we're nervous, or it's just like there's so much going on that we're processing. What techniques can people do to kind of proactively or even in the moment kind of learn to relax a little, because that's going to help?
Yeah, this is a great question. And, I don't even really think that we have to even distinguish, impatience from anxiety or impatience from anger or whatever. All of these strong emotions that are happening result in constriction, right? It's a closing down, it's a constriction. And that constriction is subconsciously uncomfortable, and we want to get away from it as quickly as possible. And so oftentimes what would happen, like say in an interview, is with that nervousness that we might be experiencing, there is this speediness, there is this wanting to rush, right? We might start talking faster, we might be jumping ahead of ourselves or losing our train of thought, and then kind of getting into that stuck position of like, I don't know what to say next. And so if we can bring a little bit of space to those situations, then it can be incredibly helpful, because the opposite of constriction is expansion. And the only way that we can have expansion is by offering more space, right? If we're holding ourselves really tight, and I'm kind of clenching my fists together right now, is that tightness is constriction. There's no space within my hands to even put something. But if I notice that constriction and really just bring an investigative mind to it, then I can start to loosen it and bring a little bit of space. So sometimes the simplest thing to do is to just pause, Give yourself 3 seconds, 5 seconds to gather yourself. But pausing is really not that easy, because again, in our society, we are not usually comfortable with silence. We're not usually comfortable with nothing happening. And so it kind of then loops back to, how do we become comfortable with discomfort, right? How do we allow for silence to be present so that we can take a little sip of space through our breath and come back to our body? And maybe we did lose our train of thought, but our train of thought, whatever thought was there that we considered that would be the thing that gets us the job, may not necessarily be lost forever, right? If we give it a little bit of space and trust that it might reemerge, that's wonderful. Or what we might also discover is that there's a lot more possibility in space. So that first thought may not have necessarily been the thing that we wanted to say, but something else emerges that really didn't have the space to emerge previously. So impatience, not a whole lot of space, right? We're in a rush, we're ready to jump to the next thing, get on with it. Can we offer it a little bit of spaciousness? Can we relax with it? And so the breath is a wonderful way to do that. Tuning into any of our senses is really an important thing to do. This is another thing. I mean, we're on a video call right now, and so we don't, what I see is a two-dimensional screen, right? And so there's not a whole lot of space between us, literally. But when you're sitting in an interview, whether it's on screen or off screen, in person, there is space between you and that other person. Sometimes we're so consumed within our own body and our own sort of situation, our own little chaos that's happening, that we forget to actually look at the other person and consider that there is space between the two of us, right? So I can just even consider the space between me and my computer screen right now, instead of getting lost in this. So I don't know if that was helpful.
Yes, I liked that a lot. I loved that. And I think kind of tying it back to what you said earlier, working on this when you're not in it, to me, would be my recommendation. That whenever you start feeling that constriction, kind of learning how to kind of be within that space is some of the best practice you can do for yourself, so that the first time it happens to you isn't a big interview. And also, I absolutely love your point that some of the best things come in space. So by giving yourself that chance to expand, you might actually think of a better answer or a better scenario than you would have initially. And it's okay to circle back to something. I think that's one thing that, I mean, that's key, and that can really help with your success rate. So I love that. How about tips to stay calm when they're really, really nervous? Like, they're starting to kind of buy into this. They're kind of ready to do some of the work, but we've all had those moments where we just got like the question from left field, or just something kind of totally jarred us. Maybe like the phone rang during the interview and you got all kind of like, and you're just like, oh my gosh, now I'm just so discombobulated. Any tips for that, that would be helpful for folks?
Yeah. I feel like I'm going to be like giving pretty much the same the same response to all of these different situations. Um, so so one thing I just want to say is, before going to your interview, you're probably going to feel some sort of anxiety, right? It's very natural to be nervous. Um, and particularly when something so important is could result from the interview. So I think one thing is just acknowledging that feeling nervous is not a sign of weakness. It's part of being human, right? And so if we get out of that mindset of this is a weakness and it's just part of being human, it's natural to be nervous. In fact, it might even be beneficial to be slightly nervous in this situation because it's sort of preparing us for battle, so to speak. And so letting that experience of nervousness be an okay thing, not a negative thing. Although we associate it with a negative thing, um, can we just feel as though it's a natural process? So if we start to relate to nervousness in a new light, in this way of like, okay, it's not the most comfortable thing. I don't particularly like feeling it, but it is part of this process. And I can expect that it's going to arise. Then when it does arise, there's not so much resistance or feeling like, oh, I've got to get rid of this, or I'm going to just flop the whole interview. No, here's what's here. And this is what's showing up. It's sort of like, um, I mean, we have to relinquish a little bit of control in this process, which is not an easy thing to do. And it's really about saying, okay, can we just allow what's happening to be here? Can we just allow it? I think one time when we've spoken in the past, I talked about there being a distinction between relaxation practices and mindfulness practices. And I really think that that's key here, right? We can have relaxation practices, which are really wonderful. And it probably would be a helpful thing to do, the night before you go for an interview or just before you walk into the building or whatnot, to do an actual relaxation practice that has the intention to physiologically create a sense of calm in the nervous system, right? So there is this desire to be calm, and we're doing tried and true techniques that bring that about. So breathing is an example of not only a mindfulness practice, but it does have that capacity to calm and bring our nervous system back into balance. Mindfulness, on the other hand, is learning how to be with whatever is happening in the moment. And whatever's happening in the moment can be very chaotic and uncomfortable and unpleasant, or it could be something that's very pleasant and exciting and so forth. So we're not really distinguishing between what the experience is. We're holding all experiences, all the ups and downs equally. And when we learn how to hold that space of whatever is appearing in this sort of balanced perspective, then what can happen is that one can experience a state of calmness, but it's not necessarily the goal. So if we try sometimes to make calmness happen, it can actually backfire, and we can then not feel calm because we're trying too hard and it's not happening, right? So now we get sort of worked up in that piece of it. So it's a little bit of a dance between those two things, right? We notice that we're nervous and we would like to be a little bit more present, a little bit more at ease with the situation, a little bit more calm. And so that's important. We recognize that we're not calm and we would like it to be different. So now we're going to try a technique to do this. But if we're doing a technique and we're still feeling a little anxious, and then that anxiety is making us anxious, so it's like panicking over the panic, then we've only created this bigger mess for ourselves. And so how do we just, again, stay with discomfort, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, and just breathing with it and just feeling our feet on the ground, connecting with the space between ourselves and others, and so forth.
I love that. I could talk for hours on some of these topics with more questions, but I think we've left the listeners with a pretty good grasp of what's involved in these topics. My question for you would be, one, how do folks find you? Because you're such a great expert on these topics. But two, what type of like daily practices would you recommend people put into practice? And how do you do that? Like, is there an app you use? Is there a certain technique? I mean, I know you've given me a few. My Peloton app actually has some good ones. I know I've talked to you a lot of times, they would make me fall asleep. The shorter ones I have found I'm finally starting to kind of practice that being in it. And now today you also inspired me on some of my reactions as a mother. I have some work to do. So what tips do you have for us there, Kelly? And then again, I want to make sure everyone knows how to find you because you have so many amazing resources on your website, and many of your things are also available virtually. So people do have access to you no matter where you're listening from when you do watch this later or listen.
Yeah, yeah. So let me just tell you how to find me first, and then I'll address your other piece. I'm located downtown Oregon, but that doesn't mean that you need to live here or come in person for a private session if that's something that you're interested in. My website is www.maitrecenterllc.com. And that's usually the best way to see what I've got going on and to just kind of gather a little bit more information about me and so forth. Everything is linked in terms of classes and how to sign up for private sessions and things like that. I also love talking on the phone, so I appreciate a phone call. So you can call me at 608-345-1597, and we can discuss what you might be struggling with and then how we might approach something like that. One thing I will say is that when people are practicing, these practices seem very simple, right? Take one breath, right? But it's not necessarily easy to employ. But one of the things that I think a lot of folks do find to be beneficial is having the support of other people, right? We might try this on our own, but sometimes it can be really helpful to learn this in community with somebody else who is going through something similar, right? So that you can discuss your own experiences with somebody else. This is what group classes really have the benefit of doing, particularly group classes that are focused on embodied mindfulness as opposed to a yoga class, for example. So we have these moments where we're sharing what that experience was like. And a lot of wisdom can then start to emerge from that, right? We realize, first of all, that we're not alone in what we're experiencing. We have a lot of similarities. And then something that somebody else may have found to be beneficial might inspire you in some way. So I always encourage for meditation and mindfulness to find some sort of sitting group or class, a short class that starts this introductory exploration, that kind of thing, if it's workable in your schedule, and you're able to do that. Otherwise, as you mentioned, we are living in an age right now where there are so many online resources for learning this, right? So you don't have time to go to a class or it doesn't fit your schedule. What could you use? And there's numerous. And again, it kind of depends on your personality, what kind of attracts you to different things. Some of these apps you have to pay for, others are free. For example, the Center for Healthy Minds has a free app. I think it's called, oh gosh, I'm losing the name of it, but there is a free app that they offer, which has not only instruction around practice, but also where there's guided practices along with it. And then you can also select how much time you want to spend. So if you want to listen to a 5-minute talk versus a 10-minute talk, or do a 5-minute practice versus a 20-minute practice, you get to select that, and it's progressive. Insight Timer is another app that's really great. I actually have 3 meditations on Insight Timer, but there's numerous teachers and courses that you can take. There's a free version, there's a paid version, but they're all, just really finding what feels suitable to what you need and what your personality is like. So, yeah, so those, I would say that those are the two that I would say are probably the best resources that I tend to offer. I'm trying to look to see what the Healthy Minds app is. It's probably just that. I'm not sure. Here, let's see.
And I'm not even sure. I've been on a few over the years and I've never stuck with any of them besides Peloton because I love their yoga and their music. Calm or one of them might have had some that focused on actual job search anxiety, like loss of job, big interviews. So for folks that if this is all feeling a little vague, I would say find some that even focus on those topics and see how they resonate with you because I have found some like targeted ones like that can be really helpful for me if I'm like prepping for a big, talk or something like that. So at least for me personally, things like that have been helpful, but I love that you don't have a one size fits all approach because I think we all do approach this differently, but I think the group aspect is huge. If you're able to work that in, I think some of the things you brought up there are just would be so helpful. And especially for folks in the job search stuff, surrounding yourself with other community going through it in a very like solutions oriented way can be helpful because like it can be really easy to just complain about things or have your relatives tell you outdated advice like did you call the company and some things like that. So I really love all of that. Do you do any group components virtually, Kelly? I know your in-person ones are and the private ones are, but I've lost track of because you have so many awesome offerings.
Yeah, yeah. So most of the group classes that I teach are in person.
Okay.
But what what could happen is there are times where somebody wants more of a specialized kind of class where they could sort of pool their resources together and schedule it as like a private session, but it be a group oriented practice in which we could then do it online if that's what worked best for everybody. So I've worked with people to create those kinds of situations before. And so I'm very flexible and open to however one wants to approach this. I think it's important for it to be individualized because it just isn't one size fits all, and everyone's going to have a different idea of what they want to gain from that time together. But yes, actually, definitely Google meditation for job seekers or unemployed or whatever it is, because I did that last night and I didn't listen to the meditation, but one meditation actually popped up that was a meditation on rejection and how to deal with rejection in the job search. So I think there's a lot out there that I'm not fully aware of because I don't directly work with people who are seeking to find new employment. But I'm sure that there is a lot that can be found online to support people.
Yes. And I can't speak from it because it's been a hot minute since I've been in the active W-2 job seeking, but I can say it helps me as a mom, as a friend, as a wife. There are times when I'm just like, finding the right topic and just kind of getting in that positive mindset and like reminding yourself like these feelings are normal and like feeling like you're taking some steps towards it is just, I feel like the best advice we can do. Too often where I see clients go awry is they just get stuck, like they don't keep trying or they give up. And if you're waiting to hear back, I know tips for staying patient, just keep moving on what you can control, keep networking, keep applying, don't put all of your eggs in one basket, try to put your momentum towards things like mindfulness or relaxation practices. Because to me that when I see clients do that, that's where I see they have the most success. So do you have any tips, Kelly, to end on today for the client? Let's say they get through all of this and they get the job and they're about to show up their first day and they're just a bundle of nerves. Like, am I going to do everything that I claimed I would. I tried so hard to get this, and now I'm here and I'm feeling imposter syndrome. And I'm always a big preacher of don't over deliver in the beginning, because if you start here, they're just going to keep expecting more. Not saying that I want anyone to slack or anything, but I think especially as females, we have this like need to be like, oh, I deserve to be here. And I wish my younger self would have known how to better calm myself down and just be like, take this like one step at a time. So any last kind of breathing techniques or advice for folks there before we wrap up?
Yeah. This reminds me of just the importance of being your authentic self, right? To not feel like you have to go in and make this huge impression and so forth, because you've already made your impression, right? If you've already got the job, you have made an impression. And so just be you. I mean, if this is a job that you really wanted and you really feel like you're going to be good at, let that patience or that passion, the passion come alive within you and just really speak from your heart. I mean, just, be you and don't pretend that you have to be somebody else. I think that's so important, especially as women, because I feel like we are always trying to, we get these signals from society that we have to look a certain way and all that kind of stuff. No, just be you. And so that, of course, isn't a direct technique, but it's really just noticing, I think, when there's any negative self-talk and turning it into positive self-talk. Right. So if you're like, oh, am I going to be liked? Who am I going to eat lunch with? What am I going to do? Is like, give yourself some positive affirmations. I am confident. I'm at ease. I am my authentic self. I'm present. I'm excited about this job. I'm excited to meet new people, and let the positive self-talk override any negativity that's coming in, and just go in and enjoy it and relax around it. Just be you.
Oh, thank you so much, Kelly. For anyone in the Madison area that can get to downtown Oregon, you should check out her space. It's beautiful. Check out one of her classes. I so appreciate your time today and your expertise. I think this will be really helpful for our listeners. So I really appreciate it. Thank you. Is there anything else you want to end with or share with the audience before we sign off?
No, just thank you so much, Nikki, for just really seeing the value in mindfulness and how it can apply to just so many different circumstances, especially those challenging times that we might be going through looking for a job. So I appreciate your kind words and inviting me on, and I hope that this discussion can be of benefit to everyone.
It absolutely will be. So thank you so much for your time, Kelly. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Nikki. Take care.